Hi, everybody. I'm George, and this is the best little horror house in Philly, the show where we talk about the best horror movie ever made, according to our guest, at least. And today's guest is a really exciting one. I'm thrilled to have him on here. Andy Kneis is here, the producer of the Flagrant Ones. Hey, Andy, how's it going?
Hello, doing well. Exciting to talk some horror, the best horror, only the best for me.
I'm thrilled to have you on here. This is a movie that I'm really excited to talk about, and
Yeah,
it's
same.
genuinely, when I was getting into horror, there were times when I was like really scared, but nothing ever really like stopped me from sleeping except this movie. So this is a real doozy for me.
Yeah, this is one. I mean, we'll get into it. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah. Are you a horror fan going way back, or is this something you got into later?
Pretty young. I feel like I remember watching, probably too young, sort of having that like sort of excitement of late at night on Halloween or something. There'd be a horror movie
Sure.
on or something like that, and like kind of scaring myself, but then kind of going back and watching more. I feel like is like that's the.
Yeah,
Every horror fan's kind of chasing
it's tradition.
that. Like, yeah, exactly.
That's great. Do you have like a preference? Was there something that you like really grew up watching a lot of, or something that you have a nostalgic affection for in terms of like subgenre?
I was trying to like sort of piece together when I ended up seeing a lot of these movies, and I think what happened was when I was like a teenager, I would like reserve these movies at the library, and I would be like, oh, I'm gonna go, and I think I even probably like saw a list of like the scariest horror movies or something like that, and I'm like, I'm gonna watch all of these because I'm a big tough man.
Hell yeah. Also, the best little horror house in Philly endorses the library. Definitely.
Oh yeah, libraries are incredible, a wonderful institution that I hope continues to be funded. One of my most formative horror things that happened to me was like in the horror section of the library, like of the tapes you could rent, there was one tape that had no cover at all, just in big, it was like a white background in red text. It just said "The Blood on Satan's Claw." And it was the scariest thing because it was like I was like, what is in this? Like, what is this movie? Like, why can't they show? Why are there no pictures? Like, I would like my mind just immediately assumed that it was so scary that they weren't allowed to like show anything. It probably was just somebody like ruined the actual cover of the movie and made their own or something. But it was like I would be like afraid of that section, not because of like all the spooky. Well, that was the thing too, like going in the, like renting a movie and seeing all the like spooky covers and stuff and being afraid. But that one was the scariest.
Exactly. Yeah. Your imagination has to do all the work.
Yeah. And then I looked it up and it's like kind of just like sort of like medium reviewed, like British folk horror that I still haven't seen, but maybe it could be fun. Yeah.
People.
I feel like growing up, it was always marathons of like Halloween movies or something like that, which I don't, I enjoy, but I feel like what really solidified my love of horror is really well done horror comedies, stuff like, I mean, I think a lot of, I was looking through it, your guests have already picked a lot of ones of my favorite, but like Evil Dead 2, American Werewolf in London, like stuff like that when it's like can balance scares with comedy well like that, like it's like nothing better for me. I
Definitely.
love that.
I think that the fact that horror and comedy both come from surprise and the subversion of the normal situation.
Yeah, exactly.
Being able to pair those two things together, it's all about getting a reaction out of people. I think that when you can pair them together well, like Cabin in the Woods, like Evil Dead 2, it's super effective. And it's the kind of thing that really sticks with you as opposed to some of the movies that might just kind of fade into the background otherwise.
Yeah, that balance of like two very extreme emotions that are also, it's like that weird connection where they're, the mechanism is almost the same, but it's two, like the complete opposite end of emotions. Yeah, it's just, I don't know. I love just like whatever extremes you can give me like in a movie, I'm like excited for it.
So speaking of extremes, the movie that we're talking about today is 1973's The Exorcist. This is a hell of a picture.
Hell, is that on purpose? That's very funny.
It really shakes me to my core, like I said, which is interesting because I'm not a religious person. Even growing up, I wasn't Catholic. Like Something about this movie just really is so scary to me, and I don't know what it is. Was the religious aspect of this movie something that clicked with you when you were watching it for the first time?
Right. Well, I was raised Catholic, so that aspect of it, I feel like it wasn't. I don't know. My like Catholic upbringing probably was a lot more mild than I think most people have. Like I grew up in a very like suburban town where there was not a lot of
Right.
like the guilt and all that the stuff that's normally associated with Catholicism, like the fear of hell and the guilt and stuff was pretty toned down. But it still was like like growing up on it, I was like, yeah, this. I gotta be careful. I gotta pray. I guess the movie is like, stay away from Ouija boards. Like that's sort of, it kind of implies that that's the reason that she got possessed in the first place. So it's like, yeah, I was like, there was sort of that thing in the back of my mind that was like, be careful, this maybe could happen, though I don't think it was quite as like, oh my god, like this is for sure real. I'm definitely going to be like possessed.
Have you ever used a Ouija board?
I must have at some point. And it's, I don't know. Have you? Is it, I feel like that's, like my friends, I'm sure at some point tried it out, and it's just like, I don't know. It feels like, I just assumed somebody was moving, like somebody like was pranking
my
me.
dad. One time we were just like walking past a Ouija board or something, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. Like, and my dad's face just went really pale. And he was like, don't touch that. Like, we're not getting it. We don't have Ouija boards in the house. And I was like, why? And to this day, he has not told me. He refuses to talk about it.
Some kind of history.
Yeah, so something going on there. But on the flip side of that, I have been the guy moving the thing.
It was you all along.
It was me all along.
I figured it. I mean, I know that there's like that whole thing where it's like almost the collective. It's like everybody pushing it. Yeah. But I always kind of just figured, no, it's somebody's like the one that's like really.
I for sure was like, this is what I think it would be fun for it to say.
Yes, exactly.
So, listeners out there, if you have had a crazy experience with a Ouija board, definitely write in, let us know.
Yeah, let us. Yeah, if your dad is listening, I'm curious. You can, if you don't want anyone to know, you can DM me and tell me the story.
Yeah, Papa Hef.
If your dad's on
there.
Twitter,
So I'm sure that he'll sign up for Twitter just for this.
Great, yeah, that'd be perfect.
So this was released in 1973, directed by William Friedkin, and written by William Peter Blatty, who wrote the book 2 years earlier.
Yes.
Interestingly, he appeared on the Groucho Marx show, You Bet Your Life, and won $10,000, saying that he planned to take some time off to work on a novel, which is this.
Whoa, I did not know that. That's super interesting.
Yeah, move over the mountain goats. There's a new Game Shows Touch Our Lives in town. But this book was a huge hit. He based the novel on a supposedly genuine exorcism from 1949. And even though the book was a bestseller, when they were trying to cast this movie, they had a lot of trouble, especially for the role of the mother, Chris McNeil. They offered the role to a ton of stars who turned it down, including Jane Fonda, Anne Bancroft, Audrey Hepburn, Barbra Streisand, Raquel Welch, Shirley MacLaine, and Carol Burnett for the role of Chris. Jack Nicholson and Paul Newman were also considered for Father Karras, and Brooke Shields, Sharon Stone, Laura Dern, and Jamie Lee Curtis were all considered for the role of Reagan. A lot of big names did not do this movie.
Right, yeah, it's interesting, especially because, like, really other than Ellen Burstyn, I feel like there aren't really any like big celebrities in it. It feels like they're mostly unknowns, but though that sounds like they were going for like a really big star cast.
What they wound up with is so far removed from what Warner Brothers wanted. Like Ellen Burstyn, she is a star comparatively, but like even then she was relatively unknown. She actually also only agreed to do the movie if they removed the line "I believe in the devil" from the script. Yeah, that was a step too far for her.
Wow. Speaking of other people that you mentioned, did you read what Jane Fonda said? Like when she turned down the movie, she said something like, "This is like capitalist trash" or something like that. Like a very like Jane Fonda response to it's very funny.
Dude, Jane Fonda rules.
Yeah, she's great.
And Linda Blair was completely unknown at the time. And Jason Miller, he plays Father Karras. He was a playwright who had never acted in movies before.
Wow, I didn't know that part. I definitely went through and like did some research on this going through, but yeah, I'm still getting some new facts. That's interesting. I didn't realize he wasn't even an actor. Wow.
But the other stars include people like Max von Sydow, who's one of the stars in Flash Gordon and The Seventh Seal as well. And the story of the voice of the demon in the body of Reagan is really interesting. It's Mercedes McCambridge was the voice of Pazuzu the demon, and in order to create this voice that she was giving, she insisted on swallowing raw eggs and chain smoking. And she was also a recovering alcoholic and wanted to drink whiskey because she knew that the alcohol would distort her voice and create the crazed state of mind that she was looking for. And
wait, so she went off the wagon or on whatever? She broke her like.
She had a priest with her to kind of walk her through it so that it was like removed and just for the character. But yeah, she literally fell off the wagon in order to get it just right for this role. And I mean, it's not just what she did to her voice. She was also tied to a chair with a sheet to get a realistic sound of the demon struggling against the restraints. And she recalls the experience as like just being horrifically angry all the time, she said. And Friedkin, the director, said that her performance and like what she was willing to do still terrifies him.
That's saying something coming from him, because as I'm sure you'll get into, he did all that stuff
psychotic.
Too. It's funny she managed to shock him when he was doing shit like that throughout the entire shoot.
His whole like goal was authenticity, and so he would do things to get these reactions. Like he asked them, "Do you trust me?" And then as soon as they said yes, just slapped him in the face.
Yes, they should have. You should never say it that you trust William Friedkin, I think is the lesson.
I just imagine him walking around Hollywood asking random people if they trust him, and then slapping the shit out of them and running off.
Yeah, well, it doesn't work anymore. People know his game now.
Yes, it's William Friedkin, the rogue slapper. Keep an eye out for him out in Hollywood land.
I know, yeah, you never know.
But yeah, so he would do crazy stuff like that. He would fire a gun behind people to get like a shocked reaction. He would have people like wired up to like yank them around. He literally gave a Burstyn a permanent spinal injury on her coccyx.
And that's it's funny. Did you watch that like behind the documentary? It's like an hour long.
No, not yet. I have it downloaded. I just haven't gotten to it yet.
That's one of the things. So that moment is on screen. Like see and it's like people are talking about it as if it's like kind of funny. Like the stunt coordinator, whoever who like yanked her down was like, yeah, so like William Friedkin told me to like really give it to her this time, and he like she like the scene where like after she gets like slapped after that big like like the crucifix scene, she's like on the ground holding her back, and it's like that moment is when she actually like broke her tailbone. And she clearly, like, everyone's sort of joking around and like talking about it as if it's like a funny memory that all this stuff went down, but she's like, yeah, I'm pissed off that they used that in the movie. And
Sure.
It's like, yeah, I don't blame you.
Yeah, that's pretty fucked up, but I understand that he's like, oh, well, it's the most authentic take. But...
Right. I mean, if that's what he's going for, yeah. I mean, she's truly in pain.
So with McCambridge, her performance led to some controversy because it wasn't widely known at first that she contributed to the performance. And so Linda Blair, the little girl, received a Best Supporting Actress nomination for her performance. And then when the information kind of got out there that McCambridge was the one who was the actual voice, there was a huge scandal. And the Academy was like, well, according to our rules, once we've given a nomination, we can't withdraw it. But the scandal wound up tanking Linda Blair's chances at the Oscars. So a lot of people who are fans of the movie like kind of hold that against McCambridge, which I think is lame.
I think that's just stupid that they would even like what? Like, so the only reason she got an Oscar is because they thought she made like a scary demon voice? Like, who like, that's stupid. Like, what? That's a really big. And why would they even think that it was a little girl? Like, how could that ever be a little girl making that voice? Like, it's so bizarre.
That was why they were so impressed.
I guess that's worthy of an Oscar if she did somehow do that.
On top of all of that, there's these scandals. I mean, there are death threats going to little Linda Blair because they said that she was glorifying the devil. Basically, principal photography was difficult to the point that people think the production was cursed and or damned, especially because of the subject matter. Most of the set burned down at one point. Blair and Burstyn both had accidents that caused long-term injuries, causing the film to take twice as long as scheduled and costing twice as much as the original budget to shoot. After all that, Warner Brothers was not, they were like, all right, we're just gonna like shunt this to the side because we're pissed that it took so long and it cost us so much money. So they released it in just 24 theaters in the US and Canada on Christmas Eve.
Christmas Eve, I didn't know about that. Oh my god.
It got mixed critical reviews, but audiences didn't care. The movie became just a huge cultural conversation piece. I assume that you've looked into some of the like reaction when this movie came out, but the stories about it are crazy.
I mean, I guess I only know sort of like the vague, like people fainting and running out of the theater and stuff like that. But I'm sure, if there are any, like, I don't know any specifics.
There's physical reactions like fainting and vomiting to scenes that we'll talk about.
Sure.
But there was heart attacks. There were miscarriages. One guy who fainted on the way down, he like broke his jaw on the seat in front of him. So he sued Warner Brothers and they wound up settling out of court. Like they were like, all right, this is our fault.
Oh my God.
So all kinds of crazy stuff. And the American Psychological Association and the Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease carried a paper on cinematic neurosis triggered by this film. So pretty crazy stuff.
Wow, man. I mean, I wonder if like Warner Brothers was secretly like, this is the best. Like this is just like publicity. This is great.
Yeah. No, I mean, hey, no press is bad press, they say.
Guess,
so
it did well.
Well, yeah, it did do very well. I mean, it's crazy because on the one hand, you have stuff like obscenity charges keeping this from home video release in the UK until 1999. So you're like, oh, people hated it. But then on the other hand, you're like, oh, this is the first horror movie nominated for Best Picture Award. It got 10 Academy Award nominations, even though it only won 2. It is simultaneously this huge shared cultural passion that everyone saw and it was on everyone's lips, but also it was this shunned kind of obscene nonsense blasphemy according to people. So just a really interesting kind of dichotomy between those kind of reactions to it.
Right. Yeah, I had no idea it was nominated for that many Academy Awards. Like, yeah, everything I had read that it was like sort of like some people thought it was like too gratuitous or whatever, and then other critics, praised it kind of thing. But that's
so it did win for adapted screenplay and sound mixing. Both of them I think merited awards. Those are both great in there. But yeah, it was a lot of performance nominations. Best Picture, like I said, wound up with 10 total. This, Jaws, The Silence of the Lambs, The Sixth Sense, and Get Out are the 5 horror movies that have been nominated for Best Picture. And Silence of the Lambs is the only winner from that group. Yeah, I'm curious about what you think about the way that the Oscars in general treat horror as a genre.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the same, like we were saying, it's the same for comedy. It's really the same for anything that's not just like straight up drama, which I think is it's too bad. I mean, I remember reading something recently that like has really like sort of allowed me to like release my frustration with the Oscars, in that they're really, like someone was saying, like they're not awards for like the best picture, it's awards for what the sort of like Hollywood, for what the movie industry, like how they want people to see them. And so I feel like they want people to think like we are very mature, we're very like, smart and intellectual, like we're creating art here. And like I feel like anything that doesn't fit that definition, no matter whether it truly is the best picture or the most important picture of the year, it doesn't matter. It's really just them being like, no, we want people to think this about us. From that standpoint, I understand it, but I also think It's very dumb because, like, you know, Exorcist, I'm sure at the time was, you know, like, we're still talking about it. Like, I'm sure whatever, or, you know, maybe not, maybe that was a good year for movies or something, but I feel like it's so often that what they do end up actually giving Best Picture
Right.
is completely, is like irrelevant by the next year. And the stuff
Yeah.
that people are actually talking about is usually like genre movies, or is movies that have created some kind of like actual, you know, cultural impact. And so, you know, it's bad. I wish that
Yeah.
they would appreciate the artistry
I saw
more.
an interesting idea that was like the Oscars should hold off for like a couple years and then stagger their awards so that you have some time to really sit on the year's movies and understand what has stayed culturally relevant. And I thought that was an interesting idea. I am not sure that I love it, but I don't know. I think that you're right in that so often we do completely forget about the movie by the next year. Like, so how many times are people mocking the choice, you know, a couple years later? I mean, people talk about Crash as this one, like an example of like the one of these most indulgent, terrible movies, and it won Best Picture. So I don't know. It's interesting, but as far as the way they treat horror, I'm very conflicted about it because on the one hand, I'm like, oh, if they recognized it, it would sort of detract from the outsider status. And like, it would be like winning the My Favorite Student award from the teacher. Like,
A little bit, yeah, a little bit. Like, I think there's sort of that appeal of horror being like a fringe
but on the
thing.
other hand, I would love for it to get more recognition because it's nice to say that when I'm consoling myself, I'm like, oh, the Oscars don't mean anything. No one really cares. We all know award shows are bullshit. But in terms of cultural cachet, it's just not true. Like, people hear about movies because of the Oscars. Getting eyes on it is important, and every time that horror does show up, there's the conversation about, oh, it's a social thriller. It's not actually horror. Like,
Yes, that's very annoying to me when people try and pretend like that. Oh, it's like they want to change the title of it because they feel like horror is sort of this like genre that's just all about like cheap scares and gore
Yeah.
and stuff, and it's
they
like
feel
no,
it's below them.
It still counts. Yeah, yes, exactly.
I definitely am conflicted about it, but it is nice to see that at least some. It's funny because it's like, yeah, just do it every couple of years. Be like, all right, we'll have one horror movie breakthrough.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, now I wonder if like now, because I do think that there are some horror movies that, you know, like you have like A24 and even like certain Blumhouse movies are sort of like giving an art house sort of like, you know, vibe that I feel like it's not that far away. It seems feasible that something like that could break through and have another one of those moments where it's like, this is like, you know, Silence of the Lambs or something like that, where it's like, yeah, this is like the big movie of the year, and it is like a low budget like horror thriller kind
You
of
kind of
thing.
have what's going on with the regular studio system with the horror studios as well, in that you kind of have these two titans in A24 and Blumhouse kind of leading the forefront on like, one does a little bit more of like the slower paced, more methodical horror, and the other one does a little bit more mainstream, but like in your face, kind of very loud and proud horror. But then
Right.
you also have these kind of burgeoning smaller studios that are putting out some really interesting stuff, like Oscilloscope and Spectre Vision. They're both these like small horror studios that are putting out some really great movies. And I think you're totally right in that one of these little weird movies is gonna just take off, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I guess even Get Out is already an example of that. Like, I think that
Yeah,
definitely,
that's true.
like, you know, transcended and was able to, like, get nominations. And, you know, it wasn't really, like, you know, it was my favorite movie of the year. And it was, like, it didn't get the credit that, you know, you would hope, but it still was, you know, got nominations and stuff, which
Right.
clearly has only happened a handful of times
Yeah,
before.
and before that, it had been almost 20 years before or since the last horror Best Picture nomination.
Jesus.
So it was a great movie to kind of break that tradition.
Yeah,
Not
for
tradition,
sure.
but pattern. Break the pattern.
The curse.
But regardless of how the Oscars treat horror,
right.
this was a success, and it was the highest grossing R-rated movie upon release, and it held that record for 18 years until 1991's Terminator 2 Judgment Day. But
Wow.
when you adjust it for inflation, this is Warner Brothers' highest grossing movie ever and the 9th highest grossing movie of all time.
Wow, jeez, I had no idea it was that huge.
Well,
Man.
it's got legs like crazy. I mean, not only does it get a lot of home releases because every couple years they put out another anniversary edition, but there's also all the midnight showings and stuff as well. That all counts towards it because it stayed so relevant and it's such a great movie. That's helped it to kind of stay atop that list as well. So
yeah, apparently, man, that's really cool. Yeah, and I know that it definitely, like, I feel like whenever like Halloween starts rolling around, I feel like that a lot of people have this where it's like, ooh, I gotta watch The Exorcist again. It's like it just feels appropriate.
Yeah, it is it's an annual tradition for a lot of people, and it's a great one because it is such a genuinely scary movie.
yeah, it's still to this day is like very not only like scary but shocking, which I think is rare considering like how long ago they made it.
To recognize that cultural relevance, in 2010, the Library of Congress selected this movie to be preserved as part of the National Film Registry. So good for you, rogue slapper William Friedkin. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the story of this movie, it's exceedingly simple in that it's really just this little girl gets possessed and some priests come in to exorcise her. So
yeah, that's it.
Yeah, like in terms of setup, there's not much to it, but this movie, it really it takes its time letting the tension build before you're even like entertaining the idea that there could be a demon. It's like an hour into the movie.
Yeah, before they even really like like it until then it could even just be like a story about a mom dealing with her daughter's like mysterious illness. Like it really is just like very straightforward.
It opens up with Lancaster Marin, who is Max von Sydow, and he's an old Catholic priest on an archaeological dig in Iraq, which is, I didn't know that was something that priests do.
Yes, that is a good point. He's just out there like being old Indiana Jones.
Yeah, every time I'm like, why is he here? But
yeah, that whole like prologue is very interesting. Like I feel like that's a very like 70s kind of thing. Like I think if they made this movie now, that would like get cut out or would be like a flashback or would be way shorter and way and like connect more like actually to the plot and not just have it be a little like tone thing at the beginning.
No, definitely. And it sets the tone incredibly well because he finds this pendant, and without giving us any explicit answers, like we just see that he's completely shook. He goes to the local bar and like takes a shot to wash down some pills with a shaking hand. You're just like, oh man, this guy is really in rough shape right now. And he heads to a statue that looks just like the stuff that they found. It's this super intimidating statue. It's huge, standing on a hill. The score is going nuts. There's wild dogs fighting. There's just like a guy standing there watching him.
Yeah, the movie is telling you like this is so scary and you're like you don't know why. You're like what is going on?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm pretty sure that the statue has like a very large boner. If I saw that right, like they don't really like linger on it, but I'm pretty sure it's like got a comically oversized.
You
boner.
just get a little glimpse.
Yeah, no, they don't. It's not gratuitous. They just kind of like let you see it on.
Very
your own.
tasteful, yeah. And you get all of this like crazy, unsettling stuff, the discordant tones and everything, keeping you on edge. And then cut to actress Chris McNeil and her 12-year-old daughter just having a grand old time living on location in the Georgetown area of Washington, D.C. Chris McNeil is, like I said, an actress. She's starring in a film about student activism, which is why she's in Georgetown. And we see Father Karras watching the filming. And when she wraps for the day, Chris is on her way home, and we get the theme song of The Exorcist, Tubular Bells by Michael Oldfield. Such a great, great theme song. I mean, it's so iconic.
That's another one of my sort of niche of things that I love is prog rock. So this movie, has everything for me. It's got all the weird time signatures and like weird instrumentation and all that stuff on top of real great horror. So it's
right.
It's great.
Are you into like Goblin and that sort of thing as well? Because they definitely seem to take like a lot of influence from this sort of thing.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good point. I'm not sure if I ever actually made that connection, but they definitely, yeah, Goblin is another one. I love just when a movie is like not ashamed of its score, when a movie really like, it's not just like, oh, we're just going to put a little like bed of strings under here to kind of like, they're like, no, here's the score. You know, Goblin has like words that, you know, there's like lyrics in it, or like Tubular Bells, like they give it its own sequence. They're like, here is our theme song. We are going to be just, that's all you're doing is just watching them walk home to our song. Like there's no, you know, it really like lets it be heard, which I think is
Definitely.
awesome.
It lets it be heard, and that's exactly how you create a lasting impact. I mean, think of
For
all
sure.
the John Carpenter ones, think of all the Goblin
Yes.
ones. All these theme songs are so impactful because you have time to absorb it. You're not worried about, oh, what am I missing by paying attention to the score? And it's not just working on a subliminal level, it's working right in your face. You're supposed to be listening to it and enjoying it.
Yeah, for sure. What's interesting about Tubular Bells, though, is that, like, because the intro is pretty scary and it has this really bizarre time signature that I am not even smart enough about music to really understand. But, like, once it gets later on, it's very prog rock in the vein of Yes and like all those like 70s bands. Like it's very sort of Baroque almost. Like it's not after that beginning bit that you hear in the movie, like it's not that scary anymore. So it's interesting that somebody heard that and was like, oh, okay, this part is going to be perfect for our horror movie.
Yeah, and it is perfect for it. And while this song is happening, we see a little of this relationship between Chris and her mother, and they have a very nice relationship. It's very affectionate, and it really makes it that much worse when things degrade.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's a good. Yeah, they really it all is like a very sort of like 70s like conversational, like very loose vibe. Like it all feels very real and like not scripted.
This extends beyond just Chris and Reagan. We also spent some time with Father McNeil, or not Father McNeil, Father Karras, who is a good son, but he's lost his faith and he feels like a fraud. And he just has this like sorrowful aura about him. It's really a great performance.
Yeah, great performance, and yet just like great actor. Like he's got sunken, like he's got big cheekbones, and he's got like really kind of like, I don't know, yeah, something about his face just like feels so like, yeah, this is a guy that just is like having a rough time.
Before he talks about how he's lost his faith, you're like, something's up with this guy.
For sure.
After this is when Reagan finds the Ouija board that we mentioned, and we find out that she had contacted a supposedly imaginary friend who she calls Captain Howdy. I saw some really interesting trivia about it where apparently the name of her dad is Howard.
Oh.
And so Howdy is supposed to call that to mind, and it like introduced itself to Reagan as like a fatherly figure because her dad and her mother have separated.
Right.
And so she's like craving the stability of a father figure. And so, you know, this demon introduces itself to her with a name that calls to mind her dad. And it's like, you see the name for like a second on a newspaper.
Right. Yeah. it's very, so you mean her dad's name?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, because I don't know if I even remembered. I kind of like, I know that they have the one scene where she like they're on the phone, but yeah, that's interesting. Is that I wonder if that's like, that seems like the kind of thing that would be explored more in the book, like, oh, how she sort of like, you know, was looking for a father figure and the devil comes along, or a demon.
I'm your new dad, Reagan.
Right. And she's like, okay.
So she's hanging out with this imaginary friend, and things start small. It's just like weird noises in the attic. Reagan's bed shakes, and the weird stuff doesn't stay confined to their house. Reagan, possessed by the demon, is compelled to vandalize a church, including weird like genital spikes on the statue of the Virgin Mary. Half of it is disturbing because you're just like, oh, you're not supposed to do that. And half of it is disturbing because you're just like, what am I even looking at?
Yeah, exactly. Or like, what? Yeah, like, why would they do that? Like, who's gaining anything from it? Because it's like the scene is literally just priest being like, oh, that's weird.
Yeah, he's like, oh no, our statue. That's like, okay. But this hyperactivity and stuff that Reagan is exhibiting leads Chris to take her to the doctors. And this is one of the first bits that's cut out from the theatrical version. So there's two versions of this movie. There's the theatrical and the director's cut, which is also called the version you've never seen before. That version is now several years old as well, so it should be changed to the version you might have seen, depending on how much you looked. But there's about 10 extra minutes, and one of the scenes that got cut is this initial visit to the doctors. I really like this scene, though, and we hear them talking about, like, oh, well, you know, it might just be, like, a nerve disorder, and we get to see the first of the subliminal demon faces.
Right.
The first time that I watched this, I was not sure that I actually saw it, and so it really freaked me out.
Yeah, for sure.
It worked perfectly, and it works really well if you're, like, already scared of the movie. It's funny because, like, watching it to take notes, I wound up, like, pausing it a bunch, and so I was removed from the, like, fear state of the movie, and like going through it, like just like staring dead on it, you're like, oh, it's kind of goofy looking.
It is, yeah. Well, it was even worse for me because I only, like, after hearing that you watched the director's cut, I'm like, oh, I'm curious because I've only seen the theatrical version, so I went and I just looked at, like, a website that broke down, like, all the differences, and one of the things that they did do in the version which is true for me, I haven't seen that. So, but I mean, all I was looking at, so it was very not scary for me because it was just like a still frame with, like, a little demon head, like, in the background. Like, she was like, Chris is, like, in the kitchen or something, and it's like, oh, look, there's a little demon by the oven. It's like, oh, okay, that's not scary.
It definitely, like, if you happen to be, like, looking at that spot already, you see it happening. You're just like, oh,
yeah,
hey, man.
That's scary.
Interestingly, the original teaser trailer for this movie was nothing but just images of this demon face quickly flashing in and out of the darkness. But it got banned in a lot of theaters because it was deemed too frightening. So I guess you're just that brave, you know?
Yeah, I'm not scared, not even a little bit.
And the face was actually just a rejected screen test for the makeup for the possessed Reagan. So they're really using every part of the buffalo on this thing.
I guess so, yeah.
And there's one line that I really like in this scene once we move past this demon face, where she's being examined by the doctor, and she says, "I don't feel anything." I'm just like, oh no, Reagan.
Yeah, that's not good.
It's really, like, it just really unnerved me, and it works in response to the doctor because he's, like, asking her, like, oh, did you feel that? But it's also super freaky, and she's, like, acting just weird enough that you're not sure if she's possessed or just, like, a weird-ass kid.
Right, exactly. Well, that sort of reminds me of, like, I looked into the case that it's based on, like, it was like an exorcism that happened. I almost want to say somewhere, like, in the Midwest, and pretty much the consensus now is that, like, it was just very exaggerated, and it was just like a teenager just, like, being a little shit and just, like, pranking people and trying to make it seem like he was possessed.
Wow.
And that part, like, having it, like, I'm sure in that scene it's very affecting, but, like, here I feel like that's, like, a total teenager thing to be like, I don't feel anything.
And the doctor, he's like, yeah, it's just a nerve disorder, and he prescribes her Ritalin. So
oh yeah, I think I remember. I feel like they mentioned that again in the version that I saw.
Yeah, she's just going to be really focused on her possession.
Yeah, I guess so.
He also mentions some obscenities that she uses, atypical behavior for her, according to Chris. Right. I don't want to say what she said, but when you watch the movie, certainly it's shocking to imagine a child saying this.
Yeah.
They take these pills, and the doctor's like, see what happens with this. Talk to us again in a couple weeks. And during a party at their house, Reagan had already been put to bed, but she comes back downstairs and tells a guest who happens to be an astronaut that he's going to die up there. and then she just pees on the floor.
I love that scene. That's so good.
It's like, scandalous.
Yes, and that she's like that. Her mom is somehow friends with an astronaut who's, like, about to go, like, on a mission to space.
Yeah,
like, all of that is just so, like, it's very, I don't know, something very, like, interesting about that was what they chose to.
It's the, like, golden age of Hollywood, kid.
Right. Yeah.
After this happens, she gets brought back up to bed and in, like, a very small voice asks her mom what's wrong with her. It's heartbreaking, man. You're like, oh, this poor kid. Sure. Chris comforts her, and walks out, but she has to immediately run back in because Reagan's bed begins to shake violently. And this is a pivotal moment in the movie because, first of all, Chris sees it. Second of all, we see it. And third of all, it's obviously not something that Reagan is doing. Meanwhile, Father Karras is having dreams about the pendant and also his mother, who recently died in squalor, taking several days before anyone noticed. He talks with her in her apartment, and he's like, hey, you shouldn't live here alone. And then she's like, this is my house, I'm going to stay here. And then she falls. Father Karras talks to his uncle and is like, you shouldn't leave her in this place. Like, we should move her to a private hospital. And he says, like, we don't have money for that. And so she just gets turned out into the street, basically, and goes back to her apartment and just dies there. It's pretty intense. My mom, for a long time, was a geriatric care manager. And so, like, her whole thing was making sure that elderly people could stay in their homes for as long as possible. But, like, this... When this kind of thing always makes me be like, maybe old people should be in like a community because like just dying alone in your apartment like that, it really just fills me with dread.
I mean, that's one of the like very real life horrors that they show in this movie that like, is not supernatural at all, but still is like very disturbing in a way.
And another one is coming right up because Chris consults a bunch more doctors who think that it's being caused by a lesion in Reagan's head. And they go in for a carotid angiography. And this scene is apparently extremely realistic. It was...
I think if I understood what I was reading, not only just realistic, it was real. Like they just performed the like, whatever sort of like blood, I feel like that scene where they're drawing blood, which is maybe one of the more disturbing scenes in the movie, is like just them actually taking Linda Blair's
pretty crazy.
blood.
I genuinely don't remember one way or the other, so I can't say, but if it's not, it's incredible looking. If it is, goddamn, that's commitment.
Right. Well, I mean, even if it's like not, even if they faked it for this, like their doctors or whoever were like, this is so accurate, which means that either way, it's, it's showing you what is happening, what happens in real life.
And not only were they like, this is extremely realistic, they literally used it as like, they would show it in classes and be like, this is what it's supposed to look like. And they stab into her artery in her neck and just like a bunch of blood squirts out. And I'm just like, God, the human body is so gross. Like,
that scene is interesting just in that it's like, I feel like the whole movie is like really does not ever get into sort of like horror tropes. Like it never really kind of like telegraphs this is a horror movie. Like it feels very kind of like it's just documenting like all the horrible stuff that's going on. But that's one scene where it's very like experiential and it's very, you feel like it's happening to you, and it's like the sort of scene that's like has the most like sort of like horror editing and horror like perspective is a scene where they're in like a doctor's office, which is very interesting.
Definitely. And this sort of thing is the kind of thing that like gets me in my own head, and I start thinking about like, oh, this little lump of muscle is the only thing keeping me alive, and like it's just nasty. And you add that horror editing that you're talking about to it, and you're just like, oh God, just keep it moving. And I mean, on top of all that, it's extremely scary if you have even the slightest bit of empathy, because Linda Blair is doing an incredible job. Poor Reagan is there. She's alone. Things are clanking and moving around her. And like, the worst part is, after all of that, they don't even find anything wrong with her. And like, the only thing scarier than medical stuff is ineffective medical stuff.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, yeah, and you feel like, I feel like they'll cut also, you see her like she's clearly in pain and clearly super uncomfortable, and then you cut to her mom, who is like, I want to help my daughter, but this is supposedly for the best, and we need to figure out what's wrong. You just like feel that like everybody's having a bad time in this scene. Like it just is like bad.
They don't find anything. More fucked up stuff keeps happening to Reagan. There's no sign of an answer, and Chris is understandably exhausted. One night she's out, and Burke Dennings, who is Chris's friend and the director of the movie that she's in, We also see him during that party scene getting extremely drunk, calling a guy a Nazi bastard.
Yes, that's right. It's they're like the servant man, like the butler guy in the house is like just like who is such a nice, like man helping out throughout the movie. He just is like being a complete asshole to him for no reason.
He basically he has a drinking problem. Like this is known among the group, but he was babysitting a heavily sedated Reagan while the nanny was out picking up her meds. And Chris returns to hear that he's died falling out of the window. While Chris is processing the death of her friend, Reagan does this spider walk down the stairs with blood pouring out of her mouth. This is another director's cut edition, so it was not in the version that you watched. But I'm curious what you think about this sort of scene and what it adds to it. So the subliminal faces, the spider walk, those are the two like scarier, like quote unquote scary things that are put into it. And I'm curious if you feel like those really add anything to the movie, or if you like the pacing that's in the version that you watch without these kind of, I don't want to call them cheap because they're certainly fine, but like they are definitely like just meant to shock you sort of stuff.
Right. It was interesting. And, I did watch it out of context, but like, I know that spider walk, like somehow has become very iconic. And I feel like a lot of people, when they hear Exorcist, they think of, the head spinning or her walking down the stairs like that, even though it wasn't actually like ever in the original cut. I watched it out of context, like on YouTube, just cause I was like, oh, I wonder. And it did feel out of place in a way. It felt like you were saying, like very, horror movie, like it was there only to scare you. And it didn't necessarily feel like it was quite in the tone of the rest of the movie. Like that's one of my favorite things about this movie in general, is just that it almost feels like they made it, obviously not, but it's like it like doesn't even know it's a horror movie. It feels like it's shot as if it's like a family drama about like a mom dealing with her daughter and like a priest finding his faith again kind of thing. Like it feels like if you cut out all the horror stuff and the possession stuff, like you would be left with like it would feel natural that it was like a drama. And so I feel like stuff like that, them playing a little bit too far into that, like, oh no, this is like the big shocking scary movie, and so we have to like try and like in our new version we have to make it even scarier and more shocking. And it's like, I like that it's like not trying to necessarily
I'm conflicted on the two versions, because I agree with you that I could probably leave the subliminal faces and the spider walk, but some of the other scenes that are added are scenes that I really like the medical scene at the beginning where he's prescribing the Ritalin and everything, and the scene in between exorcism sessions. They're like sitting on the stairs and just talking to each other, and it's really nice dialogue, and you get to really see kind of the state that they're in after this test that they're going through. And I think that that's a really effective scene, but is it worth slowing down the movie to kind of insert these shoehorned bits of scares? Like it's definitely, it's tough. So another thing I'm going to say, listeners, you have two pieces of homework. Let us know which version of the movie you prefer if you have a preference. So, but because of Burke's history with heavy drinking, it's assumed that this was an accident, but Lieutenant William Kinderman is on the case. He's great, but this character actually does persist into The Exorcist 3 as well.
Oh, really? I haven't seen any of the sequels. That's
Exorcist 2, very bad. Exorcist 3, incredible. Really, really great.
Okay.
George C. Scott plays Lieutenant Kinderman in that one, and he's a great actor. Also, the actor who voices Chucky, he's also in Deadwood. Brad Dourif. Okay.
Brad Dourif. He's great.
Yeah, he is great, and he's in The Exorcist 3. And so it's kind of interesting the way that Exorcist 2 and Exorcist 3 are both linked to The Exorcist 1, but they don't, like Exorcist 2 does not lead into Exorcist 3. So there's kind of like an interesting parallel vibe going on there. All I'll say is that it makes it very easy to ignore The Exorcist 2.
Okay. Is that the one? I feel which one has like James Earl
Yeah.
Jones and has all it has like is that
Yeah.
like and there's like voodoo stuff in it or
Yeah,
something?
that one is
Okay, yeah.
it's not good.
Gotcha. I'm still curious. I still kind of want to watch both of them now. So you did a
Uh-oh.
bad job keeping me away.
Yeah, well, you know what? As long as you do continue on to 3 and you don't let it dissuade you, I'll say
Okay.
that you've got yourself a hell of
Yeah, I'll keep going.
So Kinderman is on the case. He interviews Chris and he consults with Father Karras, who, in addition to being a priest, is a psychiatrist. And he reveals that before Burke hit the ground, his head was turned completely around.
Yes.
You're like, oh, demon strength. That sucks.
Right.
But the doctors still think that the weirdness is psychosomatic, and so they recommend an exorcism as a placebo, thinking that even if it's just that she thinks the demon has been expelled, she'll go back to normal. So I guess it's kind of like a what's the worst that happens?
Right, I get, yeah, like at that point the doctors are also getting desperate and
Yeah.
are like, I guess give this a shot.
And while Chris thinks it over, Reagan masturbates with a crucifix in one of the most upsetting scenes I've ever seen, I think. Like not even because of like the sacrilege to me, which like sure I'm sure that affects a lot of people when they're watching it, but like she's also like covered in blood and being compelled to stab herself. And she's like pathetically trying to resist. It's really just awful to watch.
That scene is so, because like, yeah, like you were saying, like the whole movie leading up to that is very slow burn and is very, you know, like there's a couple sort of quick moments, but overall it feels very grounded. And it feels like before that they're like, okay, this might just be you know, in her head, maybe there's some kind of like, you know, explanation for all this, and that's what all the characters are going on. And then it just throws everything at you all at once, where it's like she's like doing the crucifix stuff, which is like already disturbing, but then it's like she slaps her mom so hard she goes flying across the room. You see Ellen Burstyn actually break her ass. And then the head turn happens, and then she's levitating furniture. It's like so much stuff all crammed into that one scene, that and before it, like nothing of that, anything close to that crazy has happened, and it just is so overwhelming and just like, oh my god.
I'm pretty sure that's classic kid stuff, Andy.
You never, I mean, yeah, maybe it's psychosomatic or whatever.
But she also speaks in the voice of Burke, which is messed up.
Oh yeah, right.
And like you said, not only is this like way more intense, but this is also the most aggressive that the demon has been, because prior to this things are moving and things are shaking, but it's not really like, it's kind of just poltergeisty stuff at that point.
Yeah, right. And then, and most of the time, like, it seems like Reagan is like present and saying like, what's going on, help me, and not like, you know, swearing and like hitting people and stuff. Like,
yeah, like she screams like lick me, forces her mother to like get it's awful.
That also is very I forgot.
And this is actually toned down a lot from the book. So Blatty is a sick bastard.
That was, oh yeah, I remember reading they were talking about the deleted scenes, and so apparently I feel like this is almost a direct quote from the Wikipedia, where they're like, the spider walk in the movie, or in the spider walk scene in the book is toned down, where it's not her coming down the stairs, she is walking, she's like licking at her mom's heels with like a snake-like tongue or something like that. I'm like, that's not toned down. That's that's crazy. Like, but they said that it was more it's like, no, whoever someone has to put a little citation needed on that section, because it's not toned down.
Yeah. Oh my god. On top of that, they're like, okay, Chris goes to meet with Karras, and she's like, she really just nails this scene. Like, she's trying so hard to hold it together, but the cracks are showing, and she literally, she says, Jesus Christ, won't somebody help me? And it's so desperate and sad, and you're just like, oh my god.
And she's like trying to hide it, but she's got a black eye from just getting hit by her kid. Like, it just is so horrible.
It is. And then,
and that also is interesting in that like the doctors have suggested this, and then on the other hand, Karras, who is you know, lost his faith, is like, no, it's a bad idea. Like,
Yeah.
don't do this. Like, it's not real. Like, exorcisms aren't really like sanctioned by the church. Like, he's trying to like tell her why it's not a good
When
idea.
Karis agrees finally and enters Reagan's room, it is shocking. Like, what the
Yeah.
difference between what we left her at and what she's at now is awful.
Right.
She's like modeled and cut up, and she has like a feeding tube in her nose, and her eyes are this weird green. She's strapped to the bed and covered in vomit, and so is Karis after she projectile pukes on him.
Yep.
This is
And that's another one of Friedkin's classic pranks where I guess he wanted a real reaction. So he told the actor that the vomit was going to hit him in the chest, and then they shot it right in his face. And so his like shocked, disgusted reaction apparently is very real in that scene.
sure. Hey, I think pea soup is disgusting, so I get it.
Yeah. That would be funny if he was like, oh, he liked it. He's like, yeah, lunchtime.
So yeah, but so he goes in there, he gets hit with this, and then Reagan starts speaking backwards in different voices, calling out for Marin, and she gets these like scars in the form of the words "help me" on her stomach. God,
Yeah.
that's rough. That's really frightening.
Yeah, and that's another funny thing where like, so in the movie that's super scary and effective, but in this like that was taken from the like exorcism case that this was based on, except like the teen had just carved
God.
like hell into it himself, which is like a total like the whatever, I forget, they like the Wikipedia page had like words that he had carved into, or like that, you know, apparently had appeared on him, even though people just think he did it. But it's funny that it's like very like edgy teen words where it's like Christ and hell and stuff.
I heard he also did the
rather
like
than-
Stussy S.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But the effect is really cool, and Dick Smith, he's the one who did this effect here.
Yeah.
And it's really great. He built a foam latex replica of her body, wrote the words with a paintbrush and cleaning fluid, and that chemical reaction like created this like blister, and when he heated the blister, it would deflate. And so they did this and ran the film backwards, and that's what we see in the movie. So, movie magic.
That, I mean, yeah, just in general, like Dick Smith,
legend.
the makeup effects in general are just so incredible. Like, I feel like everyone talks about it, but yeah, like you so buy that Max von Sydow is an old guy. Like, there's no,
Yeah,
like,
he's 40.
It's so well done. Right, exactly. Yeah, like he's like that old now.
Yeah. Well, that's it, is that
yeah,
in a
it's-
lot of people's mind, they're like, Max von Sydow has been old forever, and it's only because
Yeah,
of this
exactly.
makeup job.
But it also is a little bit, it's like, I don't know why, like, because he's old the whole movie. It's not like, I don't know why they picked a younger guy.
Yeah.
I guess just because they liked his acting or something. But it was like, yeah, I don't know. I was kind of, I think when I thought back, like I hadn't seen in a while, and I think I was like, oh, he probably was young in that like prologue in the Iraq scene. But no, he's old there
Yeah.
too. Like he's just like,
It's like not even really that much of a prologue. It's just kind of like happening to the side, because later when the priests
Right.
are talking, they're like, "Oh yeah, Father Marin just got back." It's like, what
right,
the
yeah,
hell?
it's like, it's not like, yeah, it's like really just like a quick beginning scene showing you where he's coming from.
Yeah. But hey, it works for me. So, and
Yeah.
this assortment of behaviors leads Karis to believe that she is possessed and that she needs this exorcism. But like you said, the church needs to approve it. So Marin, who performed an exorcism in the 50s, we finally understand why we've been seeing him this whole time.
Though we didn't see that. We didn't see him perform an exorcism. We saw him on an archaeological
Yeah,
dig.
you'd think that they would be like, all right, show this bit. not.
Right.
But hey, whatever. And he's selected to perform the actual exorcism, and Karis is just going to assist. And boy, this shot when he steps out of the cab into the foggy night, it's
yeah.
the poster image, and with great reason. I mean, it's just incredible. It's creepy. It's ominous. It's fantastic.
Yeah. Oh, it's, I mean, it's like his hero shot. It's like, here he's, you know, it's like, here comes this like badass guy that we've been like, you know, it's like, we don't even know how he fits into the movie until right now. And it's like, and that's another scene where I feel like it's so effective because there are very few actual like real moody, spooky shots. And that one just like goes all out and makes it's all foggy. And there's like a big beam of light. Like, yeah, it's so good.
Yes, our hero shot of an old man with a heart disease.
Yeah, exactly. A very frail old man is here to save the day.
Both priests witness Reagan lift the bed like 2 feet off the floor.
Yes,
And
like immediately.
yeah, and she vomits prodigiously. She floats up into the air herself as well, and they attempt to exorcise this demon, but the demon just kind of toys with them, especially Karis. This is when they take the break and they rest in the stairwell and they just kind of talk about what's going on. And I really wish that this scene hadn't been cut, because Karis asks why the little girl, and Marin says that the point is to make them despair, to show them animal and ugly, and reject the possibility that God could love them. And it's so much more effective to have this kind of like understanding of like the strength and resolve that these guys know that they need to show, but it's still affecting them. I mean, by choosing this little girl, we understand that the possession, the ripples are much larger, because instead of one sad person who just gets abandoned by the people who love them and when they start going crazy, it's a little girl, and now it affects her mother, and it affects the priests. And, I think that this scene does a really good job of kind of exploring that from the perspective of the priests. Did you watch this when you were checking this stuff out?
Yeah, so this one is actually interesting because I watched like a little. It must have been on a DVD or something, but someone uploaded it to YouTube where it was like William Friedkin and was it William Peter Blatty, the writer, were like, it was like a little interview with them leading into each deleted scene, talking about like the context and stuff for it. And so that one had William Friedkin, and he says that was a scene that Blatty was like, I really want this to be in it. It tells you, it like gives you so much more information. It tells you like, sort of the point of what's going on. And William Friedkin was like, I didn't like it because I thought like the movie is all about this. Like we shouldn't have to explain what it is.
Right,
it should be like,
out.
Yeah, we shouldn't have to spell it out. But then he's like, well, I love him, so I love like him so much, and he did such a great job writing this, and he gave me like my best material that I've ever done. So I just put it in. I put it in the deleted, like in my director's cut, just for him. So it was clear that he didn't change his mind. He still apparently didn't think that was a scene that should be in there, but he was like, oh well, just to be nice to my friend.
For you, Vladdy, I'm doing it for you.
Yeah. Especially like thinking about it in context, I totally agree. I think that's a good scene. And I also just, in terms of pacing, I feel like by the time like Father Marin shows up, it moves so fast, and it feels like they're really like, they don't ever really even like leave the room, and it's just like so many things and so much like crazy spooky demon stuff is happening that it seems like a nice thing to have like a little like break and just have them like talk for a bit.
It definitely breaks it up, and it lets you get back to a point where you can get ready to be scared again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
They go back in for round 2, and Marin dismisses Karis because he says that he's going to attempt the exorcism alone because Karis hesitates in prior attempts, and the demon is his mother. And
right. The demon knows exactly what to say to like piss him off and throw him off. So it's like, I'm sure Marin is like, yeah, get the hell out of here.
The demon he got into Karis's head, so Marin says, get out. But after hearing some hubbub from the room, Karis goes
kerfuffle.
Yeah, he goes back into the room and discovers that Marin has died of a heart attack. And he just starts like punching his chest to try and revive him.
That's right. Yeah, he's like two-handed, like just slamming down as hard as he can on him to get that old heart pumping.
It doesn't work. And
no, shockingly,
Karis is in a rage. And he starts wailing on the kid.
Yes.
Like, in any other,
he just has to punch something.
Yeah.
And he's a boxer too. We see him training in earlier scenes.
Oh my God, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, so he probably was giving her his best right hook or whatever.
You're just like, oh my God, what's happening? And he's confronting this demon, and he wrestles Reagan's body to the ground, and he lets it possess him instead of her. Mm-hmm. But before he can be compelled to do anything, it's clearly trying to make it make him kill Reagan. He manages to take control of his body once more, and he hurls himself out the window and tumbles down the steepest stairs ever made.
Right.
It's just absolutely brutal. Also, kind of a it's kind of a gross fun fact, but the sound of the demon leaving Reagan's body is the sound of pigs being herded for slaughter. So
wow.
Yeah.
I feel like I didn't even I don't know, like that whole scene is so chaotic. I don't even remember like what you hear, but yeah, that's interesting.
And Father Dyer, who's a friend of Father Karras's that we've seen kind of throughout the movie, just kind of popping in and out. He was walking past the house, and he administers the last rites to his friend, who's basically just like a puddle at this point.
Right.
He's literally communicating by wiggling his fingers. And you're just like, oh God.
Yeah.
And it's really gross, but it's also very sad. And you're like, this death scene is very affecting because it's such an act of self-sacrifice.
Right.
What do you think about this kind of, do you think it's a fitting end for him?
I mean, it's pretty bleak in that it's like he, the whole movie is him trying to, get his faith back, and it's him trying to sort of atone for, whether or not he somehow like failed his mother or not. And it's like he really only has that one little moment of like redemption where he's able, his redemption is really just that he has a quick moment where he gets to regain control of his body and then kill himself. Right. So it's like, he really does not, like his story throughout the movie is pretty much just all tragedy, but it's like he really, sacrifices himself to save a little girl. So, he's heroic, but also it is very sad, like you said, and it's very horrific. Like he just is like lying there in a pool of blood, like while his friend, gives him his final last rites. Like, but yeah, I mean, I think it's a fantastic ending. I think it really like sticks with you, and it is a great resolution without kind of like really making it a super happy, like upbeat ending.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely kind of is bittersweet. And Reagan is back to her normal self after we jump ahead a couple days, and she's preparing to leave for Los Angeles with her mother, and she doesn't have any memory of the possession. But when she sees Father Dyer's collar, she's moved and she gives him a kiss on the cheek. And Kinderman is still there, still kind of investigating what's going on. Now he has to check out Father Karras's death. So the corpses are piling up around Kinderman, and
right.
he befriends Father Dyer while saying goodbye to Chris and Reagan. And it's like, this is a nice, even in the darkest moments, there is this light of new friendships being forged, and it's kind of a happy ending with a little bit of hope, as long as you don't follow up on these characters in the sequel.
Right. So in that it is a direct sequel, like it's like Reagan and everything. What happens to them?
Yeah.
Next?
Well, so Exorcist 2 is Reagan grown up, and Exorcist 3 is Kinderman investigating a serial killer in the same area, in like the Georgetown area. So
Kinderman is an interesting character just in general, in that it's like that feels like a thing that would make perfect sense in the novel, but like I feel like if you were looking at this like as a very traditional like film, like I feel like now they would be like, oh, cut him out, he doesn't do anything, like you don't need him. He just is there to kind of like build out the characters and like maybe get a bit of exposition, but he kind of is just there on the fringe the whole
definitely
time.
And I think that you can absolutely tell when, first of all, when something is adapted from a book. I think it's pretty easy to tell. But also, especially when it's adapted by a novelist.
Yeah, for sure. Like I'm sure there's stuff that he like was very precious about, and he's like, oh, I can't, no, I'm not Kinderman. Like I love, he's like, he's such a great character, but it's like, yeah, I mean, though I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that he's in there. Like I like that the movie sort of is like, in a lot of ways doesn't feel like a horror movie that would be made today. Like I appreciate how like, unique it is.
Yeah, I definitely think that Blatty was a little precious about Kinderman, considering that the movie that follows him, Exorcist 3, is also based on a book that Blatty wrote and also is directed by Blatty. So
yeah. Okay. So he loves him. Yeah. He's like, he refused to let him be cut out.
Yeah. He's a Kinder stan. But yeah, it's a nice ending. I think that it works to kind of add a silver lining to this very otherwise bleak ending, and I just think that it's great. And so much of the little pieces of this movie just work in such an interesting way that, you know, we've reached now the point, Andy, where we're going to sum up why this is the best horror movie ever made. So why don't you go ahead and I'll let you start us off. But yeah, just tell the folks, like, what makes all these pieces work together in such an effective way.
Man, I mean, I think what is so effective for me is what I was talking about, where this is a movie that I think seems very removed, like in a good way. Like it seems like it's a movie that approaches a horror story in a way that isn't just like trying to do something similar to what other horror movies are doing. Like I feel like it approaches it purely from like a filmmaking standpoint. It looks at it and goes like, what's the most like, how can we portray the emotions of this scene, and how can we like do best by these characters, rather than like how can we just like wring the maximum amount of like tension and scares from this movie. And for me, like that uniqueness makes it, I don't know, like it clearly was effective and clearly like still is popular today, I think, because of that, because it really doesn't feel like any other horror movie. And that's what makes me I enjoy revisiting it so much, is because that it just seems so not interested in falling into any horror trope really at all. Like I don't think there's like a single thing that this movie does that's in there just because that's what horror movies do. And that's, I think, what just makes it so such a standout and so much fun to watch, in something that really also, I think, kind of like transcends just the genre horror fandom. Like I think it really is effective for anybody watching it. That was pretty good.
Definitely. And I think that you hit the nail on the head with a lot of what you were saying about avoiding the tropes. And I think that a lot of that has to do with the fact that this is just such a forefather of horror. Like this is, it's a classic both in terms of its influence, but also a classic in terms of it's an old movie. Like this came out before a lot of these tropes were entrenched in horror. So it avoided them just because they weren't there to lean on. And so because it didn't have these things to prop it up, it needs to instead focus on the story. It needs to focus on these characters. And what makes it the best horror movie to me is that while all of the actual scare stuff is great, I love the makeup of Reagan. I think that the demon is so fun. It has some really affecting imagery in terms of the crucifix, in terms of the spinning head. But to me, what makes it so effective is that the real horror is found in the character moments. The real horror is watching Chris McNeil try and fail to keep her composure. It's in watching Reagan be terrified of what's happening to her. This perspective on not just the scares, but what the scares do to the people around them, I think is so effective and so great. And to me, that's why this is the best horror movie ever made.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, totally. Agree.
This was so much fun. I want to thank you for coming on.
Yeah, it was a blast.
We've now reached the plug section. So why don't you go ahead and tell the people what you got going on?
Yeah, being a horror fan, I feel like, especially like, I don't know, I'm sure this is like anyone out there that like is also a horror fan can relate, that like as soon as it starts getting into the like September area and the air, it starts getting a little colder, like I just like something in me is just like, oh man, it's Halloween time, like I can't, and I like make a huge list of all the horror movies I want to watch. And then the other thing that I do is I suddenly get the urge to do some kind of overly complicated horror themed creative project. And so the past 2 years, or the previous 2 years before this one, I made a like horror choose your own adventure thing called Werewolf House. And so if you go to werewolfhouse.com, you can play that, where it's like, it started out as just a Squarespace site that I kind of turned into a thing that lets you kind of click through and reveal a dumb, silly story about werewolves and stuff. Then I somehow turned it into a game, which almost killed me. I have no experience coding or doing anything like that, and I very like brute forced it, and it kind of works. Not great, but it's out there. So I did that, and then this year I made a Crypt Keeper musical, a musical where the Crypt Keeper sings and tells spooky stories and stuff. And now I really don't know what I'm gonna do for this year, because that also almost I keep trying to top myself, and at some point it's gonna just be like physically impossible to do more in a month than what I do.
Seriously, I can't believe first of all, I loved Werewolf House. I played through it. It's absolutely a blast. The art in it is super fun. It has a lot of great music in it. Obviously, you talked about music before, but I mean the music in the game is fantastic. And I saw you talking about this Crypt Keeper musical on Twitter, and I'm so jealous of everyone who got to see it. Like, I'm a big fan of the Crypt Keeper going back a long time, so I definitely am envious, but I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what you come up with this year, but also definitely don't kill yourself.
Yeah, well, hopefully not. We'll see. So that's if somebody, werewolfhouse.com for the werewolf thing. But now, if it's out there now, if people do want to see it, the video of the full video of the performance and like an audio version I made, like where it's basically like a radio play that has like sound effects and voiceover and stuff like that. It's andykneis.com/crypt is where you can watch all that. So
I had no idea. I'll definitely go watch that.
Yeah, well, it's kind of a thing where I'm not sure how far and wide we want to put it out there at the moment, just because it's like we want to do it again,
right?
And it will be fun to get more people in the seats. But it's like it's out. Yeah, I mean, we're not hiding it or anything, so like people are free to go check it out, especially if like you're not
in the LA
and have no chance of actually going to see it.
Yeah, well, just keep it to the cool people, listeners.
Right.
Send it to
the listeners to the podcast that have listened this far. You're definitely cool. You definitely get to go.
Yeah,
watch.
No narcs. Great. Anything else that you want to plug? Did you say your Twitter handle?
Oh, yeah. I never know how to say it. It's Kneisage. It's my last name, Kneisage. I should probably just make it my real name at this point. Who cares? But you can follow me on Twitter. It's a good follow because I never post anything, so you can just follow me and I won't bug you. You can.
Yeah, but when you do get the tweet, it's a good one.
Right. Yeah. I mean, well, maybe not, but it's usually just me going like, here's another dumb thing I made. Like, check out the link and I'll be back in next year.
Yeah, exactly. The good ones.
Right.
But yeah, and you can also, you'll hear Andy on the Flagrant Ones popping up here and there.
That too.
So check out the Flagrant Ones, a podcast that I adore. It's on Patreon, so go support Andy that way as well. And you can find me on Twitter at GergHef. You can find the show on Twitter at LittleHorrorPHL. That same username applies to Instagram and Facebook as well. We're on Letterboxd at George Hef.
Ooh, I don't know if I follow you on there.
Well, there you go. Get to it.
Now.
And and there's merch on TeePublic. Rate us, review us. It helps a lot, for real. It does help people. So if you're enjoying the show, please do those things. And tell a friend. Beyond that, I think that's it for me. So thanks again for coming on, Andy. I'm really glad I finally got to talk about this one. And
this was super fun.
Yeah, definitely. So bye, everyone.
All right. Bye, everybody. Keep happy haunting.